Well, welcome back. We're talking about Donald Trump's visit to the United Kingdom after a gala in his honor and tea with the Queen. What's been accomplished? Still with us, David Smith is Washington bureau chief for The Guardian. He's in London. Suzanne Lynch is Washington correspondent for the Irish Times. Chris Buskirk is editor and publisher of the conservative website American Greatness. And Garrett Martin is with the School of International Service at American University. Suzanne, let's get to the Brexit thing again. The president, of course, had something to say about it. Let's watch what he had to say. Sorry, that was Theresa May.
The European Union, and we are leaving on the 29th of March 2019. As we leave the European Union, we will be delivering on what people voted for: an end to free movement, an end to sending vast amounts of money to the European Union every year, an end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom, coming out of the common fisheries policy, coming out of the common agricultural policy, and ensuring, by coming out of the customs union, that we can have an independent trade policy that enables us to negotiate trade deals with the United States and with other countries around the rest of the world. That's what the British people voted for, and that's what we will be delivering.
All right, my apologies. That was Theresa May responding to what Donald Trump had to say, Suzanne. What is the Brexit issue here that's being discussed, and how did Donald Trump's comments complicate that?
Well, it's now 2 years since Britain voted to leave the European Union, but there's been very little progress on negotiating the withdrawal from the European Union, mainly because Theresa May's own government has been very divided about what kind of Brexit do they want. Do they want a kind of soft Brexit, keeping close to the EU, or do they want a hard Brexit? That means coming out as far as possible. This came to a climax this week when Theresa May published this 98-page white paper and put some meat on the bones of what she wanted. And as a result, she essentially went for a soft Brexit, keeping it as close as possible to the EU. This prompted 2 of her ministers to resign in protest.
Right.
So what we've heard her say there is a very, very good, if you like, exposition of the ideal Brexit. She's trying to tell her public that are doubting, look, I am delivering for you, we are leaving. But a lot of people are suspicious that the kind of Brexit she has now proposed isn't really leaving, that they're still going to be subject to EU laws and some part of a goods union. So by Donald Trump coming in and saying, in his interview with The Sun, he said, Theresa May did not deliver what the people demanded. And this is exactly what our critics have been saying. So this was just, a nightmare scenario for Theresa May, and that's why we came out and saw her today trying to clarify that. Of course, the big elephant in the room is she going to be able to achieve what she's just set out there? Very likely not. The EU has yet to respond to this proposal, and they are going to say you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have all the benefits of EU membership without being outside it, really. So the negotiations really are going to start in earnest now.
David, how was Donald Trump's comments seen politically in Britain?
Some conservatives tried to brush them off, echoes of the Republican Party in the US, perhaps, and just saying, judge by actions, not words, and trying to defend Donald Trump. But as you can imagine, the Labour Party, the opposition in the UK, seized on these remarks and really said this was very unbecoming of a guest to turn on his host in this way, effectively knife her in the back. And one said, was Donald Trump not brought up properly by his parents to talk in this way? Just an extraordinary breach of protocol for one foreign leader to meddle in the affairs of another like that. I suspect as time goes on, all British politicians will get back to the matter in hand, and Trump's remarks won't linger. But I think there will be an awareness that this kind of resonates with his overall ideology. He would naturally favour a hard Brexit as a man who in 2016 called himself Mr. Brexit. And as we know, in his approach to American policy, the whole notion of America first, he's emphasized in various speeches he believes in national sovereignty, and has generally sided with those right-wing populist movements rising in Europe and elsewhere. I think he would be a believer in nationalism and flying the flag in that way.
Garrett, there was one other, I guess, domestic issue which Donald Trump felt he had to give us his opinion on, and that was on immigration into Britain. Not just into Britain, into Europe, in fact. This is what he had to say. Let's watch this.
I just think it's changing the culture. I think it's a very negative thing for Europe. I think it's very negative. It very much hurt Germany. I think it's very much hurt other parts of Europe. And I know it's politically not necessarily correct to say that, but I'll say it, and I'll say it loud. And I think they better watch themselves, because you are changing culture, you are changing a lot of things, you're changing security, look at what's happening. I mean, you take a look. I mean, look at what's happening to different countries that never had difficulty, never had problems. It's a very sad situation. It's very unfortunate, but I do not think it's good for Europe, and I don't think it's good for our country.
That's what Donald Trump had to say about immigration. Theresa May, at that news conference, in fact, responded. She said Britain has a proud history of welcoming immigrants to the United Kingdom. What do you make of those comments?
Well, they're certainly interesting. I mean, I was trying to sort of think to myself, who was he making these comments to? And I think there are probably two audiences there. I mean, we have to keep in mind that immigration was a core part of the Trump message, a core part of appealing to his base. Right. And of course, he's probably thinking very clearly about the midterm elections. I believe even this morning he was tweeting about certain upcoming elections. So clearly, I think there's a message to his base. There's a bit of domestic grandstanding. And I think there's also clearly some needling of the EU. I mean, Donald Trump is no fan of the EU. Immigration has been a very significant hot-button issue. So you wonder if he's doing that again in the same way that he was doing with Angela Merkel and bringing up the sort of issue of the Nord Stream pipeline. Again, he's bringing up divisive issues. And I think finally there might also be a point of he seems to have an affinity with the right-wing populists who have all made their bread and butter over this issue of immigration.
Chris, what do you make of that? I mean, here we have two hot-button issues, as Garrett just called it, Brexit and immigration. Donald Trump felt fit to weigh into these issues. There's been a tradition, hasn't there, that guests would not be discussing domestic issues when they're on a foreign visit.
Yeah, there's certainly been that, at least the idea that that's been the tradition, though, if you look back, that has not been adhered to as closely as we might always like to think. But I guess there's two issues here. There's Brexit, and then there's President Trump's comments about immigration. On Brexit, the problems that Prime Minister May has are entirely of her own making. She did give this excellent exposition of what Brexit is supposed to be. The problem is that the white paper she released doesn't follow through on that. For instance, and this goes to President Trump's comments about why her version of a soft Brexit would basically torpedo a U.S.-UK bilateral deal, is because in her own white paper, there is language in there that says that Britain would have to refer trade deals to the EU. So this is not what she is representing to the American public. The odds are right now that President Trump is going to be in office long after Theresa May is in office because of the problems that she has created for herself. That's one thing. On the immigration front, yeah, I mean there is a sense that President Trump, I think, views himself as being the leader in some sense of the Atlantic Alliance, as press is fond of saying. He's the most powerful man in the world, and it's time for some tough love with our longtime allies to say, you're not doing yourself or us any favors with this policy of mass immigration, and you need to rethink it, because it'll be better for you, it'll be better for us.
Suzanne, I want to get to one more thing before we close. We've got a minute left, and that is the president's trip to Helsinki. He'll be meeting with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and of course that's going to come after this very acrimonious meeting in Brussels.
Again, I think timing is unfortunate here. Yeah. The fact that he's visiting Putin straight after the NATO meeting, says a lot, and I think is unsettling a lot of the NATO members. The whole point of NATO when it was set up was a kind of a buffer against the Soviet Union at the time. So I think he's making a statement by even visiting him. And then secondly, just as he was meeting the Queen today, the Mueller investigation, the announcement that there are now 12 more indictments against Russian intelligence officers, representatives of the Russian government, essentially. So I think this is going to overshadow his visit, and I think President Trump is going to come under even more pressure to raise this issue with Vladimir Putin. There were even calls today here in Washington for him